Jack's Russ Galen was up to his elbows in the guts of the ship's reactor when the alarm started blaring like a drunken opera singer who just discovered the microphone. He sighed, wiping his grease-stained hands on his equally filthy jumpsuit. "Ah, music to my ears," he muttered, though he couldn't hear himself over the cacophony. The Wayward Star, once a majestic habitat ship, now pitched and yawed like a drunk whale in zero-G. The ship was a hodgepodge of mismatched parts and jury-rigged systems, held together by little more than hope and duct tape had been in short supply since the last raid. The corridor outside the reactor room was a symphony of chaos. Crew members dashed about, shouting orders, curses, and the occasional prayer to whatever deity might be listening, or more likely, ignoring them. Jack shrugged and ambled out, figuring if the ship was going to explode, he might as well enjoy the fireworks. Captain Thalassa appeared at the end of the corridor, her presence as commanding as a black hole, sucking in all attention. Her eyes were sharp, like twin daggers ready to gut you if you questioned her authority or her choice of hats. Today, it was a lurid pink monstrosity with feathers that seemed to defy gravity. "Rust," Thalassa barked, her voice cutting through the noise like a laser scalpel. "Get your scrawny arse to the bridge. Now." Jax gave a mock salute. "Aye, Captain." "Just finishing my tea and crumpets." He weaved through the chaos, making his way to the bridge, where the real fun was undoubtedly unfolding. The bridge was a cramped affair, filled with outdated consoles and a crew that looked like they'd seen better days, if better days involved less imminent peril. Thalassa followed him in, her presence commanding immediate silence except for the persistent alarm that no one could seem to shut off. "All right, listen up," Thalassa began, not one to waste words or mince them. "We've got a visitor." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Visitor? The kind that brings gifts or the kind that demands our unconditional surrender?" She flashed a grin that was more teeth than warmth. "The demanding kind, I'm afraid. Some envoy from an alien deity says we need to start worshipping or else." Jax snorted. "Worship us? I doubt they realize they're dealing with the most irreverent bunch of misfits this side of the galaxy." Thalassa leaned back against the console, her arms crossed. "Exactly. Which is why we're going to tell them where they can shove their demands. But first, we need to figure out what they want and how to tell them to bugger off without getting us all vaporized." "Sounds like a plan," Jax replied dryly. "And here I was worried today would be boring." Just then the main screen flickered to life, displaying a creature that could only be described as a nightmare in Technicolor. It had too many eyes and not enough limbs in the right places, like a child's drawing of a monster come to life. "Greetings, humans," it intoned, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the hull. "I am the envoy of Zulthar, the great devourer. You have been selected to join the glorious ranks of his worshippers." Jax chuckled, leaning closer to the screen. "Zulthar, eh? Sounds like a lovely chap. Does he do birthday parties?" The envoy blinked several times as if computing whether Jax was serious or suicidal. "Resistance is futile. You will assimilate or face obliteration." Thalassa snorted. "Got any more cliches in there, or did you use them all up on the last hapless bunch?" The envoy's eyes narrowed. "You jest now, but when Zulthar's wrath descends." "We'll be sure to send him a thank you card," Jax interrupted, earning a few chuckles from the crew. "Enough!" the envoy roared, its form swelling with rage. "You have one standard solar cycle to comply or face annihilation." With that the screen went dark. The bridge was silent, save for the background hum of the ship's systems and the persistent beeping of the alarms, which someone finally managed to silence. "Well," Jax said, breaking the silence, "that was fun." Thalassa sighed, rubbing her temples. "Right. Rust, I want you to dig into the archives, find out what you can about this Zulthar and any tricks he's pulled before. If we're going to tell him to bugger off, I'd rather not do it from the inside of a black hole." Jax nodded. "On it, Captain. Though I must say, getting eaten by an alien god wasn't on my to-do list." "Keep up the optimism, Rust," Thalassa replied dryly. "Now, everyone else, Let's get this ship back in working order before the envoy returns for an encore. Jax made his way to the archives, a claustrophobic compartment filled with dusty data drives and ancient terminals that looked like they belonged in a museum. He plopped down in front of one and began sifting through the records, searching for anything about this Zulthar character. Hours passed, filled with the whir of machinery and the occasional curse as Jax battled with the ancient tech. Finally, he found something, an old report from another ship that had encountered Zulthar's minions. Apparently, their modus operandi was pretty standard. Show up, demand worship, and if compliance wasn't met, unleash a variety of unpleasant cosmic horrors. Lovely, Jax muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. Just what we needed, a cosmic bully with a god complex. He returned to the bridge, tossing the report onto Thalas's console. Looks like we've got ourselves a cosmic dictator with delusions of grandeur. Thalassa glanced over the report, her expression unreadable. And, what do you propose we do about it? Jax shrugged. Well, we could always try the diplomatic approach. You know, throw a party, invite them over, see if they like space whiskey. Thalassa rolled her eyes, and when that fails, we do what we do best, Jax replied, a grin spreading across his face. We improvise, adapt, and tell them to bugger off in a way they'll never forget. That's the spirit, Thalassa said, her grin matching his. Now let's see if we can't find a way to make that happen without getting vaporized. The crew of the Wayward Star got to work, their dark humor a balm against the impending doom. As the hours ticked by, they fortified the ship, rigged up defenses, and prepared for the inevitable showdown with a deity who'd bitten off more than it could chew. And as they worked, Jax couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a ragtag band of misfits in a ship held together by spit and hope, facing off against an alien god. It was almost enough to make him believe in miracles. Almost. As the ship drifted silently through the cold void, Jax pondered the irony of their situation. In a universe filled with wonders, terror, and the unknown, it seemed that humanity's finest trait was its stubborn refusal to bow down. And if Zulthar wanted a fight, well, they'd give him one. Here's to Defiance, Jax murmured, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. May we never lose our knack for pissing off the gods. The bridge of the Wayward Star was a special kind of chaos. The crew, a mix of hardened veterans and a few too many rookies, buzzed with the nervous energy of people trying to distract themselves from impending doom. Jax found himself leaning against a console, arms crossed, observing the scene with the air of a man trying to decide whether the ship's inevitable demise would come via cosmic wrath or a catastrophic failure of the coffee machine. Captain Thalassa stood at the center, her pink hat somehow managing to look both ridiculous and oddly regal. She fixed her gaze on the screen where Kaelor the Herald had last appeared, presumably plotting how best to ruin their day. Right, Thalassa began, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. We've got one standard solar cycle to come up with a plan and make sure it involves less vaporization and more of us still breathing. Just then, the ship shuddered violently, like a dog shaking off water. A few crew members stumbled and a stack of data pads toppled to the floor. Jax felt his stomach lurch, and not in the good way, like after a jug of space rum. Guess the envoy's given us a little nudge, Jax remarked dryly. Must be getting tired of waiting. I know I am. Great, Zinrake, the navigator, muttered from her post. Her voice was the verbal equivalent of an eye roll. Just what we needed. An alien god with a temper tantrum. The ship shuddered again, and the lights flickered ominously before settling back to their usual sickly hue. Jax exchanged a look with Zin, whose expression mirrored his own, part exasperation, part what else is new. Thalassa straightened, her hat bobbing precariously. Everyone focus. We need options, and we need them fast. I'm open to suggestions as long as they don't involve outright surrender or interstellar karaoke, Jax smirked. Well, there goes my grand plan to serenade the Herald with a rendition of Space Oddity, Zin snorted. That might actually work, assuming the aliens have a sense of humor, or taste, or ears, Jax added, which earned him a chuckle from the crew. In situations like these, humor was a life raft in the vast ocean of impending doom. "Okay, let's get serious," Thalassa interjected, though the smile tugging at her lips betrayed her. "Zin, what's our status?" Zin consulted her console, tapping away at the outdated tech with the grace of someone used to coaxing miracles from relics. "Well, we're not dead yet, which is always a plus. The ship's holding together more or less, but if that envoy decides to up the ante, we might be in deep space without a paddle." "Fantastic," muttered Thalassa, her sarcasm as sharp as her favorite dagger, which she had a habit of brandishing during particularly tense moments. "Any chance we could pretend to be dead and see if they lose interest?" Jax chuckled. "Somehow, I doubt Zolthar's the type to fall for the old play-dead routine. Besides, our current state of barely functional might as well be the same thing." The lights flickered again, and Jax felt a surge of irritation. As much as he appreciated dramatic lighting, he'd prefer it when not facing obliteration. "There's got to be something we can do," Zin said, more to herself than anyone. "Some way to outsmart them." Jack stroked his chin thoughtfully, smudging more grease across his face. "What about using the ship's systems to create some kind of feedback loop? Something that gives that envoy a headache big enough he'll back off while we figure our next move." Zin raised an eyebrow. "You mean weaponize the ship's terrible maintenance?" "Exactly," Jax replied. "After all, if there's one thing we're experts in, it's making the best of a bad situation. Or making a bad situation worse," Thalassa added, though there was a glint of approval in her eyes. "But desperate times, right?" "Always," Jax said with a grin. The tension on the bridge began to ease, replaced by the familiar buzz of a crew with a purpose. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was a start, and in their line of work that was usually enough. The ship shuddered again, the vibrations coursing through the floor like a reminder from the universe not to get too cocky. The lights flickered once more, a strobe effect that did nothing for Jax's headache. "Right, let's get to it," Thalassa ordered, clapping her hands. "Rust, Zin, you're on the makeshift weaponry. The rest of you make sure we're ready to hightail it out of here if things go south faster than a greased weasel." "Greased weasel," Jax echoed, attempting not to laugh. Thalassa shrugged. "What? I'm trying to be folksy." "You're succeeding," Zin smirked, joining Jax as they headed for the engineering bay. The corridors of the Wayward Star were as worn and weary as its crew, with bulkheads patched more times than Jax could count. He led the way, a spring in his step that belied the gravity of their situation. After all, there was nothing quite like an existential crisis to liven up a Tuesday. "Think it'll work?" Zin asked, adjusting her jacket. Her voice was light, but Jax could hear the underlying concern. "It'll have to," Jax replied, pushing open the door to the engineering bay. "And if not, at least we can say we went out with a bang." "Literal or metaphorical?" Zin asked, settling in beside him. "Both, ideally," Jax said with a grin, flipping switches and coaxing the ancient systems to life. The bay was a mess of wires and blinking lights, like someone had tried to knit a sweater with barbed wire. They worked in silence, a comfortable camaraderie punctuated by the occasional quip or curse. Despite the odds, Jax felt a surge of optimism. They'd faced worse, and while Zolthar was a new brand of chaos, they'd find a way through it. They always did. The ship shuddered again, a reminder that time was running out. But instead of dampening their spirits, it seemed to fuel their resolve. "Almost there," Zin muttered, fingers dancing over the controls. Jax nodded, making the final connections. "Let's hope this works. Otherwise, we'll be the first crew to be smited by faulty wiring." "Hey, if we're going to go, let's do it our way," Zin said with a wink. The ship gave one final shudder, then settled, the lights holding steady. Jax exhaled, a sense of calm amid the chaos. "All right," he said, stepping back from the console. "Let's show that envoy what a little human ingenuity can do." They returned to the bridge, where the atmosphere crackled with tension and anticipation. Thalassa stood at the center, her presence as commanding as ever, her hat now replaced with a more practical headset. "Well," she asked, raising an eyebrow. "We're ready," Jax replied, sliding into his seat. Just say the word, Captain. Thalassa nodded, her expression a mix of determination and the usual edge of mischief. Then let's give our friend Kaylor a taste of human hospitality. As if on cue, the screen flickered back to life, and the envoy's grotesque visage filled the display. Its multitude of eyes blinked in unison, a sight that was both fascinating and unsettling. Humans, the envoy intoned, voice echoing through the bridge. You have had time to consider. What is your answer? Thalassa leaned forward, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Our answer? Glad you asked. Let me show you. Jax hit the switch and the ship hummed to life, systems thrumming with a mix of desperation and defiance. The feedback loop engaged, sending a wave of energy back through the envoy's connection, like poking a bear with a very long stick. The envoy's image flickered, its expression twisting into something resembling confusion, then anger. What is this? A little something we call rejection, Thalassa replied smoothly. We're not interested in your deity subscription service, thanks. You dare, the envoy began, but its words were lost in the cacophony of feedback and static. The image flickered again, then vanished, leaving the bridge lit only by the dull glow of the consoles. Jax exhaled, relief warring with adrenaline. Well, that's one way to decline an offer. Thalassa grinned, the kind of grin that promised more trouble. Now let's see if they take the hint or if we're about to become intergalactic roadkill. The ship was silent, save for the hum of machinery and the distant clatter of the crew at work. The tension on the bridge was palpable, a weight that pressed down on them with the promise of more chaos to come. But for now, they'd won a small victory, and in a universe that seemed determined to see them fail, that was enough. At least for the moment. Jax leaned back, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Here's to Defiance, he murmured, the words a quiet toast to the stars. And as the ship drifted on through the void, the wayward star and her crew prepared for whatever came next, ready to meet it with sarcasm, stubbornness, and perhaps the occasional greased weasel. Jax Rust, Galen wiped his greasy hands on his equally greasy overalls, a ritual that made him feel slightly more prepared to face whatever fresh hell awaited him aboard the wayward star. The makeshift feedback loop might have thrown a wrench into Kaylor the Herald's plans, but it wasn't going to hold him off forever. The thought of Zulthar's envoy still lurking out there in the void made his skin crawl like he'd been locked inside a can with 100 angry space crabs. Back in the engineering bay, Jax's gaze wandered over the clutter of ancient machinery and scrap parts. It was like a junkyard married a thrift shop and moved into a starship. Most of it was useless, but amidst the chaos, something caught his eye. A seam in the wall plating, just a shade darker than it should be. It practically screamed secret compartment louder than a failed hyperspace jump. He pried it open with a crowbar he'd affectionately named All Persuader, revealing a cramped chamber behind the wall. Inside were rows of tech he'd only seen in outdated tech manuals and fever dreams. If this wasn't history's lost and found, he didn't know what was. Well, what do we have here? Jax muttered to himself, the words bouncing off the walls like the ship's perpetually malfunctioning sensors. He leaned in closer, examining a particularly archaic-looking device. It hummed with a soft, eerie glow that said, "Touch me and you'll probably regret it." He could practically hear Zin's voice in his head. That thing's as reliable as a politician's promise. But desperate times called for desperate measures, like trusting a relic that looked like it might have been made before the universe discovered color. While Jax was busy being a space-age tomb raider, the rest of the crew was on the bridge, dealing with their own set of problems. The air was thick with the kind of tension that could only come from realizing your food rations were about as plentiful as a politician's integrity. "We're running low on supplies," Thalassa announced, her voice cutting through the chatter of the bridge like a knife. "Unless someone can grow a garden in 0G, we're going to have to make some hard choices." Zin, never one to miss a beat, leaned back in her chair with a slow smile. "Well, at least I know who'll be first on the menu." "Keep dreaming, Zin," quipped Jax, stepping onto the bridge with a piece of the newly discovered tech tucked under his arm. "You're more stringy than a bad batch of space jerky." The crew's laughter was a brief respite from the reality of their situation, a reality that loomed larger with each passing moment. Jax laid the device on the table with a thud, capturing their attention. "Found this little beauty hidden in the walls," he announced. "Figured it might be useful for more than just scrap." Thalassa eyed the tech with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. "And what exactly is it?" "Best guess. It's some kind of energy amplifier," Jax replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Might be just what we need to give Kaylor the mother of all headaches." Zin raised an eyebrow. "Or it might blow us all to hell." "Life's full of uncertainties," Jax shrugged. "Besides, isn't that what makes it exciting?" The captain, never one to shy away from a gamble, gave a nod of approval. "If Russ thinks it might give us an edge, I'm willing to give it a shot. But only if we can figure out how to use it without frying ourselves in the process." Jax grinned. "That's the spirit." "I'll get to work." As he returned to the engineering bay with the device in tow, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something big. He'd always had a knack for tinkering, but this was a whole new level of what the hell are we doing. Even so, there was a certain thrill that came with turning the tables on a cosmic bully. Meanwhile, tensions among the crew simmered like a pot about to boil over. The looming threat of starvation did wonders for their tempers, and the air was thick with unspoken grievances and unsaid apologies. "You know," Zin said, sidling up to Jax as he fiddled with the device, "if this works, you might just earn yourself a medal, or at least a half-decent meal." "Yeah, well, I won't hold my breath on either," Jax replied, soldering a connection with all the finesse of a drunk surgeon. "But if we can get this thing running, it might just buy us some time." "Or turn us into a light show," Zin countered. "Always the optimist," Jax grinned. The truth was, they were running out of options, and the alien presence was getting more menacing by the minute. It was like playing chess against a grandmaster, except the chessboard was on fire and the pieces were trying to eat you. Jax wiped his brow and stepped back, admiring his handiwork, or at least what passed for it under their current conditions. There we go. Nothing like a little elbow grease and sheer terror to get the job done. Zin peered at the device warily. "You sure it's not just going to explode?" "Nope," Jax said cheerfully. "But then again, where's the fun in certainty?" Back on the bridge, the crew was preparing for another round with the envoy. Thalassa stood at the helm, her demeanor as cool and collected as ever, though the tightness around her eyes suggested otherwise. "All right, crew," she said, her voice steady but tense. "Let's see if our resident genius has cooked up something that won't turn us into cosmic toast." Jax swaggered back onto the bridge, the ancient tech tucked securely under his arm. "Ready and waiting. Just give the word." Thalassa took a deep breath, casting a glance around at her motley crew. They were a ragtag bunch, not much to look at, but they'd seen each other through more scrapes than any one of them cared to count. If anyone could pull off a miracle, it was this group of stubborn misfits. "Let's do it," she said, her voice a mixture of resolve and defiance. Jax set the device in place and began the process of integrating it with the ship's systems. The machinery hummed to life with a sound like a cat purring, if that cat was on a steady diet of caffeine and bad choices. "Ready to see if this thing's got any juice?" Jax asked, fingers poised over the controls. "Do it," Thalassa ordered, eyes fixed on the screen as if sheer willpower could make it work. Jax hit the switch, and the ship shuddered as the new system powered up. Lights flickered, and the air filled with the smell of ozone. The feedback loop they'd set up earlier thrummed with new energy, like a beast waking from a long nap. "Well, it's doing something," Zin remarked, eyes wide. "Question is, will it help or just make things worse?" "Only one way to find out," Jax replied, fingers crossed behind his back in a silent prayer to whatever cosmic forces might be listening. The screen blinked to life again, and the envoy's image returned, more distorted than before. The mass of eyes blinked erratically, confusion and frustration evident in its grotesque visage. Humans, the envoy's voice crackled like a recording played on broken speakers. What trickery is this? Just a little something we whipped up in the garage, Thalassa said, her tone light and mocking. Thought you might appreciate the effort. The envoy snarled, its image quivering with barely contained rage. You will regret this insolence. Funny, that's what my last ex said too, Jax muttered, earning a snort from Zin. The device hummed louder and the feedback loop intensified. The ship system strained under the pressure, but they held, channeling the energy back at their would-be conqueror. The envoy's image fractured, pixelating as the connection crackled with static. Looks like Rust Bucket ingenuity wins again, Jax said with a grin, the thrill of triumph coursing through him. Don't celebrate just yet, Thalassa warned, though her eyes shone with pride. We've bought ourselves some time, but we'll need more than luck to get out of this. The envoy's image flickered one last time before disappearing entirely, leaving the bridge quiet and tense. The crew exchanged looks, equal parts relief and apprehension. They'd won a small victory, but the shadow of Zulthar loomed larger than ever. Jax leaned back in his seat, exhaustion and adrenaline warring within him. Well, that was fun. Let's never do it again, yeah? The rest of the crew chuckled, the sound a balm for their frayed nerves. For now, they'd managed to stave off disaster, but they all knew it was only a matter of time before Kaelor tried something new. Keep an eye on those systems, Thalassa instructed, her voice firm but weary. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Aye, Captain, Jax replied, already thinking of ways to improve their haphazard defense. As the crew settled back into a semblance of routine, the ship drifted through the void, a tiny speck in an indifferent universe. But despite the odds stacked against them, they remained defiant, clinging to their ship and each other like barnacles on a battered hull. Jax glanced around at his crewmates, a motley collection of misfits who'd somehow become a family. They were battered, bruised, and outgunned, but they were still standing. And in a universe where survival often felt like a losing battle, that was no small feat. Here's to stubbornness, he murmured, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. And as the ship sailed on, the wayward star and her crew prepared to face whatever came next, armed with nothing but their wit, their grit, and a little bit of hope against the vast sea of darkness. The wayward star shuddered like a drunk trying to remember where he left his dignity. The lights flickered ominously, threatening to plunge the ship into a gloom that not even the best therapist could coax you out of. Jax, hands still smudged with grease and existential dread, stared at the archaic-looking device with the growing suspicion that it was less energy amplifier and more spatial blender. Well, that's not supposed to happen, he muttered, more for his benefit than anyone else's. Thalassa's voice crackled over the intercom, the slight tremor in it masked by her usual bravado. Jax, what's the situation down there? Please tell me we're not about to become an intricate piece of abstract art. Jax wiped his grimy hands on his overalls, the fabric stained with enough engineering sins to get him excommunicated from any decent guild. Depends, he replied, injecting false cheer into his tone. Do you fancy looking like a Picasso painting? The bridge, already a symphony of anxiety, erupted into a chorus of exasperated groans. Zin, voice dripping with sarcasm, chimed in. I always thought my best feature was my third eye. Might as well make it literal. Glad to hear the optimism still alive and kicking. Jax shot back, trying to ignore the way the ship's systems were howling their disagreements. Just give me a bit. I think I can fix this. Better hurry, Thalassa warned, her pink hat tipped precariously to one side as she braced against the shuddering console. The envoy's not going to wait for us to sort out our mess. Jax wanted to retort with something witty, something that would cut through the tension like a hot knife through a very apocalyptic butter, but he was fresh out of wit and drowning in malfunction. The device, the centerpiece of his latest harebrained scheme, was glowing with all the malevolence of an angry sun deity. He slapped Al Persuader, the trusty crowbar, against the table for inspiration, but the ship only groaned in response, a low, keening sound that made his stomach do somersaults. "All right, you ancient piece of junk," he murmured to the device. "Time to play nice." The air was getting thick with the scent of ozone, a sure sign that things were about to go sideways if they hadn't already. Jax worked feverishly, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead, while alarms blared with the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. The ship was alive with warning lights, each one more urgent and demanding than the last, as if competing to see which could give him a nervous breakdown first. On the bridge, Thalassa and her crew were grappling with their own set of problems. The envoy's distorted visage had returned, more irate than ever. "Surrender," it demanded, voice like nails on a chalkboard, "and you shall be spared." Thalassa's laugh was sharp, defiant. "Spared from what? A life of servitude and bad karaoke." "Wouldn't mind the karaoke," Zin muttered, fingers flying over her console as she tried to stabilize their course. "But I'll pass on the servitude." "Fools," the envoy seethed, its image quivering with barely contained rage. "Your defiance will be your downfall. Considering our current trajectory, I'm more worried about the ship's hull being our downfall," Zin replied dryly. Meanwhile, Jax was playing his own game of interstellar whack-a-mole, trying to keep the device from turning the ship into a floating fireworks display. The feedback loop was spiraling out of control, feeding back into the ship systems with all the grace of a bull in a tea house. "Breathe, Jax," he told himself, hands moving with the practiced precision of someone who's been one wrong move away from obliteration more times than they cared to count. "You've got this. No pressure." His fingers danced over the controls, trying to reroute power before the whole thing went critical. He could almost feel Thalassa's eyes boring into him from the bridge, her faith in his abilities both a comfort and an additional layer of anxiety he really didn't need right now. On cue, the ship gave another violent shudder, and the lights dimmed to an unsettling twilight. Somewhere in the distance, a pipe burst with a sound like a gunshot, and Jax winced. "That's probably nothing," he lied to himself, focusing instead on the glowing mass of questionable intent before him. In the silence that followed, the tension was almost palpable, a collective holding of breath as the ship's systems settled into grudging compliance. For now, at least, they'd managed to stave off complete disaster. "Jack's status," Thalassa's voice was tight with stress, a reminder that everyone was counting on him not to screw up. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair and leaving streaks of grime in his wake. "Think I got it stable," he reported, exhaustion creeping into his voice. "But it's a temporary patch job. We need a more permanent fix or we're toast." "Understood," Thalassa replied, the weight of command heavy in her tone. "Do what you can." "Always do," Jax said, a small smile tugging at his lips despite everything. "Though sometimes I wish what I can involved a nice beach and a cold drink." The laughter that followed was more subdued, more strained, but still there, still fighting. But as the ship limped through the void, the crew could feel the eyes of Kalor's minions upon them, a constant, brooding presence that seeped into their bones like the cold of space itself. The envoy's demand still echoed in their minds, an insidious whisper that promised salvation in exchange for their freedom. "You know," Zin said, breaking the uneasy silence, "I'm starting to think we picked the short straw in the cosmic lottery." "Yeah, well, we always did have a knack for bad luck," Jax replied, fiddling with the edge of his overalls where the fabric had started to fray from too many close encounters with disaster. "And worse odds," Zin agreed, casting a glance toward the captain. "What's the plan, Thalassa?" "We can't keep playing cat and mouse forever." The captain's eyes were distant, calculating as she considered their limited options. "We hold out for as long as we can. If nothing else, we'll go down fighting, not bowing." "Spoken like a true martyr," Jax said, his tone somewhere between admiration and exasperation. "But I'd rather not add martyr to my resume just yet." They all knew that time was running out, that they were running on borrowed seconds. The ship's systems were a ticking clock, counting down to an inevitable end unless they could somehow pull another miracle out of their collective hat. And yet, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the crew's camaraderie was a lifeline, a reminder that they were more than the sum of their ship's failing parts. They were a family, forged in the fires of shared hardship and bad jokes, bound by something stronger than fear. As the wayward star drifted onward, its crew prepared for whatever came next. They were outgunned and outnumbered, dancing on the edge of annihilation, but they were still standing, still fighting, and in a universe that seemed hell-bent on breaking them, that was something. "Here's to Defiance," Jax murmured, raising his imaginary glass once more, a toast to the unknown. And with that they pressed on into the darkness, into the fight, into the very heart of impossible odds, determined to make their stand. Jax Rusk Galen wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving behind a streak of grime that could have been mistaken for war paint if you squinted hard enough. It was fitting, given that the scene before him was less engineering bay and more battlefield of bad decisions. The wayward star was groaning like an old man with arthritis, and the alarms were blaring their usual chorus of doom. It was a melody he had grown disturbingly fond of, though he couldn't say the same for the headache it accompanied. "All right, folks," he announced, gathering the ragtag bunch of grease-streaked mechanics and technicians, "we're gonna try something stupid. And by stupid, I mean a plan so harebrained it needs a leash." Zinrake, the ship's navigator and resident cynic, leaned against a bulkhead that looked like it was one good sneeze away from giving up entirely. "Sounds like a typical Tuesday," she said, smirking with all the warmth of a solar flare. "Gonna enlighten us, Rust, or should we just start panicking now? Why do I feel like panicking is the default setting around here?" Jax muttered, but loud enough to elicit a few nervous chuckles from the assembled crew. "Here's the deal. We use the ship's core energy to zap those god-forsaken space deities back into their cosmic cribs." Thalassa, the captain with a penchant for pink hats and impossible odds, raised an eyebrow. "You mean the same core that's currently holding us together with duct tape and wishful thinking?" "Exactly, Captain," Jax nodded, his grin practically daring the universe to call his bluff. "We overload it, channel that energy into a focused blast. Boom, no more celestial bullies." A moment of silence followed, filled only by the ship's protests and the distant rumble of what sounded unsettlingly like "we're all gonna die." Then, in typical fashion, Zin broke the tension with her usual sardonic flair. "Brilliant. And if we survive, I vote we open a bar. The wayward toast has a nice ring to it." "Great idea, Zin. And if we don't?" Jax asked, mirth hiding the genuine fear gnawing at him. "Then I guess we're toast either way." Zin shrugged. "Might as well go down with style." But just as they were warming to the madness of their plan, a new voice cut through the din, colder than the space they were hurtling through. "Not so fast," it said, dripping with disdain. "Some of us aren't too keen on dying for a lost cause." Rust turned to see who had dared piss on his parade. It was Bren, a surly hulk of a man with a face like a clenched fist and a disposition to match. He stood with a handful of others who shared his lack of enthusiasm for their captain's latest venture. "Ah, Bren. Couldn't help but notice you're looking particularly mutinous today," Jax quipped, hoping humor might diffuse the brewing storm. Bren crossed his arms, muscles bulging like they were auditioning for a bodybuilding competition. "Why should we follow this crackpot plan? For all we know, you'll turn us into space dust." Jax sighed, running a hand through his hair, leaving more grease in his wake. "Look, Bren, I get it. This plan's more Hail Mary than bulletproof, but what have we got to lose? Our lives might be a start," Bren shot back, his eyes glinting with rebellion. The tension hung heavy and thick, swaying dangerously close to breaking point. The other crew members shifted uneasily, caught in the crossfire of deference to leadership and the instinct for self-preservation. Thalassa stepped forward, her presence commanding the kind of respect that even Bren couldn't ignore. "I won't force anyone to risk their lives," she said, her voice steady as a rock in a storm. But make no mistake, if we do nothing, those celestial creeps will swat us like flies. This is a fight for survival." Bren hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. It was the kind of moment where decisions were made not with the mind but with the gut, and Rust found himself holding his breath. But before Bren could voice his decision, Zin interjected, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Oh, come on, Bren. What's life without a little crazy? If we survive, I'll even let you name a cocktail after yourself." The tension broke as laughter rippled through the crew, even drawing a reluctant smile from Bren. "Fine," he grumbled, though his expression suggested he was still tasting something sour. "But if this goes sideways, I'm haunting you, Rake." "Deal," Zin said, tipping an imaginary hat. "You'd be the most annoying ghost ever anyway." With the mutiny averted, at least for now, Jax turned back to the task at hand. "All right, team, let's make this happen. If we go down, we do it our way, loudly and with lots of fireworks." "Just another day on the Wayward Star," Thalassa said dryly, her pink hat bobbing as she nodded. The crew dispersed, each person moving with a renewed sense of purpose, even if that purpose was laced with a healthy dose of impending doom. Jax lingered a moment, watching as his motley family fell into action. "You think this'll work?" Zin asked, falling into step beside him, her expression more serious than he was used to. "Honestly," Jax replied, rubbing his eyes, "I'm not sure. But I figure if the universe wants to crush us, we might as well make it a challenge." And with that, they returned to work, the ship thrumming with the energy of desperation and defiance. The reactor room became a symphony of clanging metal and buzzing circuits, each sound a small testament to their determination or their collective insanity. Meanwhile, Thalassa coordinated from the bridge, barking orders and offering snippets of encouragement that were as sharp as they were heartfelt. Her leadership was a beacon, guiding them through the storm, even if that beacon was currently flickering. Time seemed to twist and stretch in the crucible of preparation, the minutes slipping by in a haze of adrenaline and focus. The ship shuddered underfoot, a constant reminder of the ticking clock they all raced against. Finally, it was time. The core was prepped, the crew was in position, and Jack stood at the precipice of his make-it-or-break-it moment. He glanced around, locking eyes with each of his crewmates, drawing strength from the shared resolve that tied them together. "All right," he said, voice steady even though his heart was pounding like a drum. "Let's show these cosmic bastards what we're made of." With a final nod, he activated the improvised system, feeling the ship hum to life around him. The energy coursed through the Wayward Star, a wild, untamed force that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Across the ship, the crew braced themselves, clinging to consoles and railings as the vessel surged with power. The lights flickered, casting shadows that danced like specters across the walls, and the air crackled with electric tension. On the bridge, Thalassa watched the readings, her expression a mask of calm focus. "Zin, align us with the target," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Already on it," Zin replied, her fingers flying over the controls with the ease of long practice. The ship groaned in protest as it shifted course, aligning itself with the celestial threat that loomed large and ominous on their screens. It was a target that seemed impossibly vast, an indomitable force that challenged their very right to exist. "Steady," Thalassa murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Just a little longer. In the reactor room, Jax watched the energy levels climb, his heart in his throat as the minutes ticked by. He could feel the weight of every decision, every gamble pressing down on him like a physical force. "Come on, you old rust bucket," he whispered, urging the ship to hold together just a little longer. And then, with a shuddering lurch that shook the entire vessel, the energy discharged. It was a blinding, searing release, a bolt of raw power that tore through the void with all the fury of a universe denied. The Wayward Star staggered under the recoil, alarms blaring as systems strained to compensate. But for a moment, a single breathless moment, they were more than just a struggling crew on a failing ship. They were warriors, defying the odds, challenging the gods themselves. And as the light faded, as the echoes of their defiance rippled through the vast emptiness of space, they waited to see if their gamble had paid off, if they had truly turned the tide against an enemy that seemed as eternal as the stars. As the silence returned, thicker and more oppressive than ever, Jax let out a shaky breath. "Well," he said, turning to the exhausted, exhilarated faces of his crewmates, "if we're still here, I guess that means we won." "For now," Thalassa replied, her voice rich with relief and determination. "But we've shown them we're not going down without a fight." Zin chuckled, her laughter a bright spark in the gloom. "Guess that means we can get started on that bar, huh?" "Yeah," Jax grinned, feeling the tension finally begin to ease. "The Wayward Toasts, first round's on me." And as the crew of the Wayward Star came together, a band of survivors bound by defiance and grit, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The Wayward Star was a mess, which was saying something considering it had been a flying junkyard long before they decided to make it a weapon. Rust was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, using the ship itself as a makeshift artillery piece wasn't the height of engineering brilliance. But hell, there was no turning back now. "Remember folks," Russ said, addressing the crew over the intercom, "if any of you see a bright light, it's either salvation or our untimely demise. Either way, enjoy the show." The crew's laughter crackled through the ship's outdated, cantankerous speakers. It wasn't the sound of joy, but rather the kind of grim amusement you find at the gallows. Black humor was their last refuge, and they clung to it like a lifeline. On the bridge, Captain Thalassa stood with her trademark pink hat perched at a jaunty angle. She looked like she was ready to lead an impromptu parade if parades involved imminent destruction and cosmic retribution. "All right, Zin, how's our trajectory looking?" Thalassa asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Zin, with her habitual eye-roll reflex, tapped furiously at the controls. "We're on course, Captain. Assuming we don't spontaneously combust, we should hit the target, or at least graze it and piss it off." "Perfect," Thalassa replied. "I do love irritating deities before breakfast." Back in engineering, Jax tightened another bolt that was likely more decoration at this point than functional. He wiped his greasy hands on his even greasier overalls, ignoring the loud protests of the ship's systems. "Come on, girl, just a little longer," he muttered, treating the Wayward Star like an old lover who still had a few tricks up her sleeve. "Jax, you got a minute?" came Bren's gruff voice from the doorway. The big man looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon, which was probably his default expression. "Sure thing, Bren. Unless you're here to punch me, in which case I'm fresh out ta minutes," Jax replied, giving his best lopsided grin. It was the kind of smile that said he was either completely confident or completely insane, possibly both. Bren grunted, which could have been a laugh in disguise. "Just wanted to say, if we make it through this, I'll buy you a drink." "Least I could do for not leading us into a death spiral." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's the nicest thing you've ever begrudgingly said to me, Bren." "I'm touched. Don't get used to it," Bren replied, crossing his arms like he was trying to ward off this uncharacteristic show of camaraderie. "Hey, if you two are done with the love fist, can someone help me with this?" came Zin's voice over the comms, tinged with her usual sarcasm. "I'm good, but I'm not single-handedly save us from space gods good." "On my way," Jax replied, leaving Bren to his own devices, probably sharpening his scowl somewhere. As Jax made his way to the bridge, the ship's lights flickered ominously. "Any day now, K-Lore," he muttered, knowing full well that their antagonist was lurking out there, waiting for the perfect moment to rain on their parade. When Jax arrived, Zin was hunched over her console, surrounded by a forest of outdated tech that seemed to grow more wires and blinking lights every day. "What's up, Zin?" Besides the fact that we're essentially waving a red flag at a cosmic bull, Zin replied without looking up. "I need you to patch the feedback loop into the energy amplifier. We're gonna need all the juice we can muster." "Got it." Jax dove into the mess of wires, working quickly. It was like untangling a particularly stubborn ball of yarn, only the stakes were a tad higher. As he worked, Zin glanced sideways at him. "You ever think we're just a bunch of monkeys fiddling with a grenade?" she asked, her voice light but her eyes serious. "Yep, but we're the best damn grenade-fiddling monkeys this side of the galaxy," Jax replied with a grin. "Besides, who else gets to tell old gods to shove it?" "True," Zin said, her smile matching his. "Not many folks get to thumb their noses at divine beings." The ship shuddered, a reminder that their time was running out. Somewhere in the void, Kaylor was no doubt preparing his final ultimatum, his disdain for humanity as vast as the space between stars. "All right, all patched up," Jax announced, standing back and wiping his hands on his overalls again. Not that it made any difference. "Good," Zin said, her fingers flying over the keys. "Let's give Kaylor something to write home about." On cue, the view screen flickered to life, and there he was, Kaylor the Herald, looking as smug and superior as a cat that's cornered a mouse. "Ah, the resourceful humans," he sneered. Still clinging to hope, Thalassa folded her arms, her pink hat bobbing as she tilted her head. "Hope's a dangerous thing, Kaylor." "You should try it sometime." Kaylor's lip curled in disdain. "You cannot win. Your struggle is as insignificant as an insect against the heel." "You mean like a cockroach?" Zin piped up, not missing a beat. "Because those bastards are survivors. Kind of like us, really. If you surrender now, I might allow you to live as my pets," Kaylor offered as if he were doing them a favor. "Tempting," Thalassa replied dryly. "But I'm allergic to bullshit." Kaylor's eyes narrowed, shimmering with barely contained fury. "Very well. You've chosen your fate." "Yeah, we did," Jax said, stepping forward. "And here's a little something we whipped up just for you." With that, he threw the switch, and the wayward star roared to life. Energy coursed through the ship, a barely controlled torrent that vibrated through every bolt and rivet. It was like riding a lightning bolt, only this one was aimed right at Kaylor's smug face. Outside, the void lit up as the ship unleashed its fury. It was a spectacle, a cosmic firework that blazed a trail across the stars. For a moment, even Kaylor looked taken aback, his expression unreadable as the energy raced toward him. Then came the impact, a cataclysmic burst that shook the very fabric of space. The view screen flared white, the ship shuddering under the recoil, and for a heartbeat everything was chaos. When the light faded, the screen showed Kaylor, his form shimmering but still intact. He looked different, not weakened exactly, more like someone who'd been slapped by a child and was contemplating whether to laugh or reach for the belt. "Impressive," Kaylor said, his voice surprisingly calm. "But ultimately futile." "Well, we tried," Jax said, turning to the others with a shrug that was half resignation, half defiance. "At least we made an impression." Kaylor chuckled, and it was a sound devoid of warmth. "Indeed. And now it's my turn." With that chilling promise, the screen went dark, leaving them alone with the aftershocks of their attempt. Silence hung heavy in the air, the magnitude of their gamble settling in. "Well, that could have gone better," Zin said finally, breaking the tension with her trademark sarcasm. "But hey, at least he didn't turn us into cosmic jelly." Yet Thalassa added, crossing her arms as she considered their next move. "But he knows we're not backing down." "Damn right," Bren grunted, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. "We're not done yet." "No," Thalassa agreed, her gaze steady. "Not by a long shot. We've still got a few tricks up our sleeves." Rust gave a grim smile, the weight of their situation pressing down but not overwhelming. "Then I guess it's time for round 2. There was a murmur of agreement as the crew began to regroup, drawing strength from one another. They were battered, bruised, running on fumes and raw determination, but they were still here, still fighting. "All right, folks," Thalassa said, her voice a rallying cry. "Let's see what else we can pull out of this tin can." As they set to work, piecing together a new plan from the scraps of their first attempt, the wayward star once again became a hive of activity. They were a motley crew, a ragtag band of misfits and renegades, but they were all they had. And sometimes that was enough. With every sparking wire and clanging tool, they forged ahead, determined to show K-Lore and the universe that humanity wasn't so easily crushed. That while they might be just a speck in the cosmic scheme, they were a speck with bite. And as the ship's systems hummed back to life, as the crew fell into the rhythm of the fight once more, the wayward star became a beacon of defiance. Not because they were unafraid, but because they chose to act despite their fear. In the end, it wasn't the size of the weapon that mattered, but the spirit of those wielding it. And the crew of the Wayward Star had spirit in spades. "Ready for round two?" Jax asked, glancing at his crewmates with a grin that dared the universe to try them again. "Hell yeah," Zin replied, her smile turning razor-sharp. "Let's see if K-Lore can handle another taste of human ingenuity." With that, they braced themselves, ready to once again stand against the storm. They might not win, but they'd go down fighting, and sometimes that was victory enough. And as the ship hurtled toward its next confrontation, the crew of the Wayward Star knew one thing for certain. They were in this together, come hell or high water. And together they were unstoppable, even against the gods. Jack stood in the belly of the Wayward Star, a place that felt less like the heart of a spaceship and more like a scrapyard that had somehow achieved consciousness. The ship's core thrummed beneath his feet, vibrating through the tools scattered around him. He could feel the energy pulsing beneath the metal, an erratic heartbeat that matched his own. "All right, Rust," Zin's voice crackled over the intercom, laced with the same dry amusement she always seemed to carry. "You ready to show those overgrown glow sticks what humans are made of?" Jax, who was indeed Rust to those who knew him best, glanced around at the haphazard display of wires, blinking lights, and the peculiar device they dubbed the spatial blender. "Yeah, just about ready to go full blender mode," he replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "Let's hope it doesn't turn us into a cosmic smoothie." "Chances of that?" Zin asked, and he could almost hear her brow rising through the comms. Jax shrugged, though she couldn't see it. "About 50-50. But hey, I'm a betting man." He fiddled with the last few connections, twisting wires into place with the confidence of someone who had tangled with death enough times to consider it an old buddy. The ship's core was their only hope now, and there was a certain poetry in using the old girl to flip the bird at the gods themselves. "Ready on the bridge," Thalas's voice cut through, her calm presence reassuring despite the chaos. There was a clatter as she adjusted something, probably her infamous pink hat. "What's the status, Rust?" "Good to go, Captain. Just keep your fingers crossed and your hat on tight." "Always do," Thalassa replied. "Everyone else ready?" A chorus of affirmations echoed back, some more enthusiastic than others. Bren's gruff agreement came last, sounding like he'd just swallowed a bucket of nails for breakfast. Which, knowing Bren, wasn't entirely out of the question. "All right, let's light this candle," Jax said, reaching for the switch that would unleash their defiance into the universe. "Here's hoping K-Lore enjoys the fireworks." The ship shuddered as he flipped the switch, the energy amplifier, possibly Death Blender, roaring to life. The Wayward Star groaned, every bolt and beam vibrating with the force of their audacity. It was like riding a wild beast, one that could either leap the chasm or hurl them into the abyss. On the bridge, Zin was a blur of motion, her fingers dancing over the consoles like a concert pianist on a bender. "We're at full power, Captain," she reported, her voice a mix of exhilaration and terror. "Core's stable as it ever gets." "Good enough for me," Thalassa replied, her eyes locked on the viewscreen. Outside, the void pulsed with ominous energy, K-Lore's presence like a shadow just waiting to pounce. "Let's see if we can't clip those wings." As the ship's systems aligned, Rust felt a swell of something that might have been hope or possibly indigestion. Either way, they were committed now. The feedback loop engaged, channeling the raw power of the core into the energy amplifier. The archaic-looking device lit up, its glow no longer soft but a blinding, angry blaze. "Now or never," Rust muttered, watching the monitor as their jury-rigged plan came to life. In the vastness of space, reality seemed to warp as the Wayward Star unleashed its fury. The feedback loop amplified and redirected the energy in a way that defied logic and possibly several laws of physics. The result was a cataclysmic burst that tore through the void like a cosmic shotgun blast. Kaylor was waiting, of course, his smug visage materializing on the screen, just in time to catch the full brunt of their retaliation. His expression shifted from condescending amusement to genuine surprise, which Rust considered a minor victory in itself. "Pretty, isn't it?" Zin commented, her tone as dry as the martinis she'd never get to drink if this went sideways. "Not bad for a bunch of monkeys with a grenade, huh?" Rust added, watching the energy arc toward Kaylor's manifestation. Kaylor's form wavered, the cosmic equivalent of a signal cutting out before resettling into something more substantial. His eyes, however, didn't quite mask the flicker of doubt. "You dare," he began, but the rest was lost in the deluge of energy. When the light finally faded, the void felt different. The oppressive weight of Kaylor's presence had lifted, leaving behind an eerie stillness. On the screen, his image was gone, swallowed by the backlash of their gamble. Did we do it?" Bren asked, his voice rough with disbelief. "Looks like it," Thalassa replied, her tone measured but with a hint of triumph. "We sent the bastard packing. At least for now," Zin cautioned. "Space gods have a way of nursing grudges." "Let him hold a grudge," Russ said, leaning back against the console with a weary grin. "We've got plenty of surprises left." Thalassa turned to face the crew, her pink hat slightly askew but her resolve unshaken. "We've bought ourselves some time, folks. Let's make the most of it." As the crew set about assessing the damage, both to themselves and the ship, Rust allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. They'd done it. Against all odds and with nothing but spit, duct tape, and a blatant disregard for caution, they'd pulled it off. "Drinks on you, Bren?" Rust asked, catching the man's eye. Bren huffed, a sound that might have been a laugh. "Seems fair, but don't think this means I like you." Rust chuckled, the tension finally ebbing away. "I wouldn't dream of it." The crew worked with renewed vigor, the fear of imminent annihilation replaced by the familiar thrum of determination. They were still in deep space, still adrift in a universe that didn't give a damn, but for now, they'd earned themselves a reprieve. As Rust helped Zin recalibrate the navigation systems, he couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. Humans against the odds, standing toe-to-toe with gods. It was the kind of story you'd hear in a bar and laugh off as nonsense. Yet here they were, living it, breathing it, and somehow surviving it. "Think they'll come back?" Zin asked, her focus on the screen but her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Probably," Rust admitted. "But next time we'll be ready. We've got a few more tricks they haven't seen yet. Let's hope they don't get tired of our little magic show," she replied, a sardonic edge to her smile. Thalassa joined them, her expression a mix of pride and exhaustion. "You two did good, we all did." "We're a stubborn bunch," Russ said, trying to sound modest and failing spectacularly. "Stubborn is good," Thalassa said. "Stubborn keeps us alive." As the crew settled into a rhythm, repairing what they could and jury-rigging the rest, the Wayward Star felt less like a collection of metal and more like a living thing. A testament to their collective will, ragged and battered but still flying. "Think the universe will give us a break now?" Bren asked, his voice carrying from where he stood with a welding torch, patching yet another breach. Rust snorted. "Doubt it, but here's the thing, neither do we. We can't." And that was enough, for now anyway. As the crew of the Wayward Star continued their repairs, their laughter and banter filled the ship, a defiant chorus against the silence of the stars. They were still here, still fighting. And for as long as their ship could hold together, so would they. Against space gods, against the odds, against everything that said they couldn't. Because, in the grand theater of the universe, the crew of the Wayward Star were determined to be more than just a footnote. They were a story, one still being written with every stubborn breath. And as long as they kept writing, they weren't finished yet. Jax, Rust, Galen surveyed the wreckage of the Wayward Star like a proud parent looking over their questionable offspring. The ship was a masterpiece of barely controlled chaos, but it was their chaos. And even though they just played cosmic chicken with a space deity, they were still in one piece, more or less. "Well, we've looked worse," Russ said, scratching at a patch of grime on his temple that had become more stubborn than an unpaid parking ticket on Mars. "You say that like it's an accomplishment," Zinrake shot back, her fingers sliding over the console with a familiarity that bordered on indecent. "I'd call it a miracle we're still afloat and not cosmic dust." Rust shrugged, a gesture that had become second nature. "Miracle, accident, lucky break. I say we take what we can get." Bren grunted from his usual corner where he was patching a hole that looked like it had been chewed by a metal-hungry rodent. "Luck's for suckers. We're here because we're too damn stubborn to quit. Or too stupid," Zin added, her tone dry enough to parch a desert. "Let's call it a mix of both," Russ said, not at all offended. "And speaking of stupid, what's the status on the engines?" "We're hovering between just right and oh hell no," Zin reported, her eyes flitting over the readouts like a hawk on caffeine. "If we push them any harder, we might end up in a parallel universe. Maybe one where Kalor's a nice guy." "Let's save the alternate dimensions for a rainy day," Thalassa interjected, sweeping onto the bridge with all the authority her pink hat could muster. It bobbed jauntily as if defying gravity itself. "How's our fearless engineer?" "Still breathing, Captain," Russ said, offering a mock salute. "And ready to get us back into fighting shape. Or at least limping shape." "Good enough for me," she replied, her grin as rebellious as the rest of her. "We'll need all the limping might we can muster for our next move." Rust raised an eyebrow, leaning against the console. "You got something planned, or are we just tempting fate?" "Tempting fate is just a side hobby," Thalassa said, her eyes sparkling with a mischief that matched her hat. "I've got a course laid in that'll keep us out of trouble for at least a few solar cycles." "Trouble tends to find us," Zin said, not looking up from her displays. "We're like the universe's favorite chew toy." "Then we just need to be less chewy," Russ suggested, though his grin suggested he didn't believe it for a second. "What's this new course you've got in mind, Captain?" Thalassa tapped a few keys, bringing up a map that looked as if it had been designed by a drunken spider. "There's a cluster of systems just beyond our current position, largely unexplored. Could be resources, could be danger, but it's our best bet for staying hidden." "Unexplored," Bren said, his voice a low rumble. "Sounds like code for instant death, or opportunity," Thalassa countered. "Depends on how you look at it." "Yeah, well, I prefer my opportunities with less chance of spontaneous combustion," Bren muttered, though he didn't seem entirely opposed. Rust considered. "We're running low on supplies. If there's anything out there worth scavenging, it could buy us time." "And time," Zin chimed in, "is a commodity we can't afford to waste." "All right then," Russ said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get to it. We may have dodged one cosmic bullet, but I doubt it'll be the last." The crew of the Wayward Star fell into a rhythm, patching, repairing, and occasionally swearing at any piece of equipment that looked at them funny. It was a routine they knew by heart, punctuated by the hiss of welding torches and the clatter of tools. As they worked, Rust reflected on the odd nature of their victory. It was hard to believe they'd face down a being like Kalor and live to tell the tale. Not that anyone would believe them. Hell, he barely believed it himself. "Ever think about what we'd be doing if we hadn't signed on with this ship?" Rust asked, throwing the question out like a grenade with the pin half pulled. Zin snorted. "Probably something equally suicidal. I hear asteroid mining's a real joyride, or maybe herding space slugs on Venus. Always wanted to try that." Bren grunted in agreement. "Never been much good at anything but this. Can't imagine life without the constant threat of imminent destruction." "Can't argue with that," Russ said, tightening a bolt that hadn't been loose but seemed to need it anyway. "There's something to be said for knowing what you're good at." As the Iors ticked by, the ship began to resemble something that might pass for spaceworthy. Panels were replaced, wires rerouted, and at least one fire was extinguished before it became a problem. All in all, a productive day. Thalassa returned to the bridge just as the last of the repairs were being wrapped up. Her pink hat was slightly askew, but her confidence was unwavering. "How's the patient, doctor?" she asked Rust with a playful lilt. "Stable, Captain," he replied, pretending to take her question seriously. "I'd prescribe a few days' rest and a barrel of engine lubricant." "Well, you can have one of those," Thalassa said, her grin the kind of infectious that should have come with a health warning. "Time to put your skills to the test. Zin, plot us a course through that unexplored sector." "Let's see what the universe has in store." Zin nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. "Course laid in, Captain. Ready to make the jump." Thalassa took her seat, adjusting her hat like a crown. "Punch it." The ship shuddered as the engines kicked in, propelling them toward the unknown. Rust watched the stars streak by, his mind a jumble of thoughts and possibilities. It was a big universe out there, full of wonder and danger in equal measure. And despite everything they'd been through, he couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement at what lay ahead. "Here we go again," Bren muttered from his corner, though there was a spark in his eyes that belied his gruff exterior. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Russ said, settling into his seat. As the wayward star surged forward, the crew fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They'd faced gods and lived to tell the tale. Whatever else was out there, they'd meet it head-on, with the same stubborn tenacity that had carried them this far. Russ glanced at Thalassa, her focus unwavering as she guided them toward their uncertain future. She met his gaze, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. They were in this together, come what may. The ship rocked gently as they slipped into the void, the hum of the engines a lullaby against the backdrop of stars. Russ leaned back, letting the steady rhythm of the ship soothe the frayed edges of his nerves. "So, Rust," Zin said, breaking the silence with the kind of casual nonchalance that usually preceded trouble. "If we survive this next adventure, what's the first thing you're gonna do?" Rust chuckled, considering. "I dunno, maybe open a repair shop, settle down, fix old tech, or start a bar. Always wanted to know what it's like to be on the other side of the counter." "A bar?" Bren scoffed. "You drink all the profits." Rust shrugged, unrepentant. "Probably. But at least I'd die happy." "Ambitious goals," Zin said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "I'd probably just get some sleep." "Sleep's overrated," Thalassa chimed in, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "There's too much to see, too much to do. The universe isn't gonna wait." "Then let's not keep it waiting," Russ said, feeling that old spark of adrenaline reignite. The wayward star sliced through the darkness, a small defiant beacon against the endless night. They were just a ragtag crew on a rundown ship, but they were more than the sum of their parts. Together, they were unstoppable, a force to be reckoned with. As they journeyed into the unknown, Rust felt the familiar tug of wanderlust, a hunger for adventure that no amount of peril could ever truly sate. They'd survived gods and monsters, faced down impossible odds, and come out the other side stronger for it. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together like they always had, with wit, grit, and a healthy dose of gallows humor. Because in the end, that was the true power of humanity, an indomitable spirit that refused to be extinguished, no matter how dark the night. "Here's to the next great adventure," Rust murmured, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. And with that, the wayward star sailed on, into the vast unknown, ready for whatever the universe dared to throw their way.